John MacArthur. Every time I try to go on a break, something happens and I'm like, I need to talk about this. So, here's the deal. If you didn't watch the stream on Monday, we're taking a month-long break from the podcast on Mondays. Still going to be doing some streams when I can and dropping some videos when I feel compelled to do so. And I definitely feel compelled because John MacArthur was given a microphone. And just lately, it seems like anytime John MacArthur is given that microphone, something disastrous comes out of his mouth. And that happened. That happened. There was a Q&A panel from, I think it's Grace Church of the Valley. It's a Grace Community Church clone. And they had a conference, and they had Costi Hinn and John MacArthur come to this conference. And they asked him a question about his book that he wrote about this war on children. He went into detail about, certain sexual ethics being, leveraged on kids and being like, hey, you have to believe certain things. Okay, that's pretty standard from this group. But this is where things get really off the rails.
So this is a war on the children. I was thinking about another part of it the other day. I was reading a book, interesting book called A Profession Without Reason.
I want you to watch Costi Hinn's approval of this too.
It's a book that shows basically, this is pretty shocking to some of you, that psychiatry and psychology is finally admitting the noble lies that they've been telling for the last 100 years. And the major noble lie is there is such a thing as mental illness. Now, this isn't new.
Whoa. Okay. Huge statement. Huge statement. There is no such thing as mental illness. That's what John MacArthur just said. And Costi Hinn said, that's right. Mental illness. This thing, like so many people, I did a video I think a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago now, about John MacArthur's view of psychology and how he literally says in the introduction of his book about counseling that all psychology is satanic, that it is a demonic attack against the church. That's what he says in the introduction. You can go and find it. All right, this is the one counseling. It's from a lot of guys at Masters, and specifically John MacArthur wrote that part, the the first chapter. It's insane. It is awful. It's way out there in left field, and a lot of us were like, okay, you can think that, but you still know there's effects that people have based off of their circumstances that compels their mind in a certain way that makes it to where they can't cope with something. You get that, right? And most people who don't even like psychology will understand that. And they'll be like, well, yeah, the Bible is the best cure. But there are some things that you need to go and, get some medication for. Most people are reasonable and they go with that, but some aren't. And John MacArthur just proved that he's in that some, that he is one of these guys who is teaching. And again, he has been a pastor for decades now. He has been the president of a seminary and college. This is the guidance that he's been giving this whole time, and people are just realizing how disastrous it is. He just got up there with that microphone and said that mental illness is not real. All right. And again, Costi Hinn, that's right. That's what he said. Let's keep going.
You have Thomas Saz back in the 1950s writing a book, who was a psychiatrist, on the myth of mental illness. There's no such thing as PTSD. There's no such thing as OCD. There's no such thing as ADHD.
What?
Those are noble lies. To basically give the excuse to, in the end of the day, to medicate people. And big.
John MacArthur has no credibility when it comes to mental health issues. Let that be said. He does not even have an earned doctorate. All right. He is the president of a seminary that is unaccredited because of the way that they handle things and who is in leadership and all that stuff, which I think now they're probably proud of. But like, he has no credibility when it comes to mental health. He has no degree in that field, absolutely at all. And here he is getting up there and claiming to be, this source of truth. And he's letting you guys all know because he read a book. He read a book by one psychologist who came out and said, I don't agree with, this whole field. And he goes, that's the proof that I need to get up here and say that PTSD isn't real. That ADHD isn't real. How ridiculous. Like, you don't have any credibility. You don't understand these things. That's very clear from your counseling books. Even when I was in these camps, of supporting John MacArthur and buying his books, I would literally never recommend his stuff about counseling, even back then, because it was so clear that he had zero idea what he was talking about. And then it comes out that pretty much everyone in the counseling department there, including John Street, has no idea what they're talking about when it comes to these issues. This is that hyperneuthetic counseling, which means like using the Bible, and you just counsel people. They have a sin problem. They don't have, PTSD problem. They don't have ADHD. What they need is Jesus. They just need Jesus. And if they really understood that they're sinners against a holy God, then they would change. Then, and you could modify the behavior. This is fundamentalism. This is, you have to just grit and grind and work so that you can then be this peaceful person and have this sound life. He's going to go into detail about how, if you only did this, then everything would work out perfectly fine for you. It is a form of the prosperity gospel that if you're a good Christian and you love Jesus hard enough, then yeah, you get to just have a merry little life, which is fine for someone who doesn't have to deal with actual people. Like, there is a literal velvet rope at Grace Community Church, not just conferences. I've heard it's at the church where you cannot go and talk to John MacArthur. He's the pastor there, and you cannot go. He's sitting there in the first pew. He's not in a green room, but he might as well be because he's behind the velvet rope. He is inaccessible. He doesn't exist with other people. He exists with pastors. All right. He looks at his pastoral staff and probably views them as the people that he's ministering to, that he's discipling, but he's not with real people. Like, he's not in the trenches. He doesn't understand what people are actually going through. All of his examples are from like the 60s and 70s. Like, let's talk about counseling now. Pastor John MacArthur, that everyone introduces him as Pastor John MacArthur in everything. Like, when was the last time he did actual counseling with someone? I would love to know. I would love to know if that's, what a pastor is supposed to be doing. It's not going to be there. He's a speaker, just like Stephen Furtick is a speaker. Just like, all these guys, Mike Todd is a speaker. He's not a pastor. That's what's going on here. He is out of touch, completely out of touch. And I think his age is beginning to let this out of touchness, that's not a phrase, but this out of touchness kind of just ring out really loud because there's no filter anymore. And he just gets up there, he's given a microphone, and he's just going to say stuff like this.
Pharma's in charge of a lot of that.
Big Pharma is in charge of a lot of that.
If you understand, take PTSD, for example. What that really is grief. You are fighting a war, you lost your buddies, you have a certain amount of survival guilt because you made it back, they didn't. How do you deal with the grief? Grief is a real thing. But grief is part of life. And if you can't navigate grief, you can't live life.
So just get over it.
But if you clinically define that, you can give them a pill a series of medications, and they end up in LA homeless on the sidewalk.
Oh, that's what's going to happen.
This is in regard to children, it's the most deadly thing that's been unleashed on children, medication. We're trying to make clear to parents that behavior is essentially the result of choices that kids make. And if you parent them properly, they'll make right choices. But if you blame it on something other than their choices, and you identify them as having something they can't do anything about, but medicate it, you literally are turning your child into a potential, well, not only a potential drug addict, but maybe a potential criminal, because they never learn how to navigate life in a socially acceptable way. So the book deals with the ways in.
Sometimes people go through things that they need help being able to process. He uses PTSD as the example and talks about war. Like, I get, you're a speaker and you want to give a situation that everyone can kind of relate to. Maybe that's part of it. But I also feel like it's just part of it. He doesn't deal with people with PTSD. When he's talking about PTSD, he's talking about really a stereotype of people who have gone to war, because that's all he can think of, because he doesn't have personal examples to be able to actually be like, hey, this is PTSD, or at least someone who would be classified as having PTSD, and they don't really have it because it's not really a thing. Sometimes people need help, and it's more than just, here's a Bible verse, go home and memorize it, and think about how you can obey this thing. And write out 15 different ways that you can obey this scripture passage in your daily life. And then he starts going into like this whole thing about kids and how basically when you start, diagnosing them, you're giving them a handicap, and you're saying like, hey, it's not your fault. You're going to have this, you're going to wrestle with this, and it's an excuse so they can continue to act out that behavior, which I'm sure he would say that behavior is a sin. There are things that affect children to where they cannot function the way that you as a parent would want them to function. And even though you give them the right teaching, that doesn't mean that they're actually going to obey that. Again, prosperity gospel right here, like a familial prosperity gospel of you teach them to do the right thing and they will do the right thing. And so honestly, this probably makes a lot of parents feel just like the crummiest parents on the planet because their kids aren't obeying. Pastor John tells me that all I have to do is, do our, family worship and train them up right and put them in a private Christian school, get them away from, those Philistines in the public school. And if I do all these things and I, attend church and I go to Sunday school and I have them all in all the programs, that everything will work out fine. And then when it doesn't, they feel like they're such a failure. No, there might be other things. Now, maybe it's not ADHD. Maybe it's not something. Maybe there are cases that do get, a wrong diagnosis, and it's not actually that can happen. But the vast majority of people that I've personally dealt with, and I exist in this world, okay? Like, boy, I can tell you, I exist in this world where I have to deal with stuff about special needs. I have to deal with stuff about ADHD, autism, all these kinds of mental divergence. Like, I got to deal with this stuff all the time. This is my life, all right? And some of these kids really do need it. They really do. And if they don't get it, like, it's not just that they start sinning all over the place. They have such a difficult time living. Like, this is about pain. Like, John MacArthur has no idea what he's talking about. Some of these kids, when they don't get that medication, are literally like rocking themselves because they cannot function. But again, well, your arm's not broken, right? We don't see a cast. So it's just your brain. You just have to have more willpower. Again, grit and grind, and you can improve as a human being and live out your best life. It sounds like the prosperity gospel to me, but Costi Hinn, who knows a lot about the prosperity gospel, shaking his head and saying, yes, yes.
Children are being assaulted, and they're formidable because they're done by media, and they're in the hand of every kid through the cell phone.
Cell phones are
So
the
the church has got to step up. We started a campaign called Grace for the Children. If you want to strengthen the church, and I know it's true here, if you want to strengthen the church, minister to the children. Let the parents know you're going to work to protect the children, which is the parents' greatest concern. So I wrote the book along those lines. I was telling the guys earlier that several Christian publishers passed on it. They wouldn't publish it, which shows you how woke even Christian publishing has become.
Yeah, you're saying that because if your name is on it, that book will do well, and they pass even on a business opportunity.
Yeah. If you sell 10,000 books, that's the publishers make money. That's good. Mm-hmm. In a first printing like this of 75,000 books, that's a huge financial benefit to a publisher. But they don't want that. Because again, we're back to what we've been talking about. They're trying not to offend the culture.
Yep.
Well, thank you, gentlemen.
It's over. Oh my goodness. All right. This is the kind of stuff that just drives me up a wall. All right. He just literally said that the reason why all these publishers passed on his book is because they're woke. Or maybe the book is trash. Given what he has just said about this attack on children, and it's about, psychologists using all this medication just to like dope our kids so that they don't see what's really going on and they can't cope and they can't really understand what sin and righteousness is. Like, no wonder people passed on this book. Even though, yes, they do want money. Even though, yes, we looked at it on Monday, how much they want money. And 75,000 books is a lot of books in this day and age. And that is a lot of money for these publishers. But they even passed on it because even that isn't worth it. Isn't worth how bad this book was going to be. If that's the kind of teaching that's hiding in there. And it's been hiding in his stuff for a long time, and people who have been paying attention to his counseling stuff, and they don't go for the ACBC stuff. They don't go down, talking about nouthetic counseling every 5 seconds. We've seen it. This is nothing new. It's just now the filter is off, and he gets to go up there and say whatever he wants. And people like Costi Hinn are just sitting there agreeing. You guys, there should be a retirement age. There really should be. Like, I don't know what that age is, but I know John MacArthur is way past it. Because almost every time he's given a microphone in this kind of a setting where he could just talk about what he wants, it is very much get off my lawn energy, which, you've been on the lawn for a long time. You've been there for a while. In some ways, you have a right to say, get off my lawn. But the way he does it, and the extents that he goes to, it's too much. I'll see you in the next one.